All right, if you would turn to the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 18. Last time in chapter 17, we went through the story of where David killed Goliath, and then the ensuing battle afterwards between Israel and the Philistines. Saul, it appears, just kind of sat back and watched it happen, or let it happen. He doesn't look like he was really, after he turned things over to David, he just kind of stepped back and got out of the way. And David took the lead by killing Goliath, and then when the rest of the army of Israel saw it, they come in and defeated the rest of the Philistines. This time, we read a little bit into chapter 18 last time. We'll go ahead and pick up with chapter 18, verse 1, and reread what we did last time, at the end of last time, about Jonathan and David. Jonathan and David develop a very close relationship here, almost like brothers. And so much so, Jonathan gives David his battle attire, his clothes and sword and his bow and his girdle, things that he would have worn in battle. Remember, Jonathan has been kind of Saul's right-hand man. He's just Saul's son. But we saw a few chapters back where Jonathan and his armor bearer, remember they went in and took on one of the garrisons of the Philistines, and they wiped out over 20 men in that one place, and then fought some more. And so he's kind of a hero in himself in the kingdom, and well thought of by the people. And now you have David, another young man, and the Scripture doesn't really tell us. We know David is a young boy. It tells us that. He's not a full-grown man yet. He's somewhere in his teens is what most people think. Jonathan, I can't help but think was probably a grown man. I mean, because it's been some time back before this incident that his father put him over quite a few thousand troops, and the common practice in that day, you would not have done that with a teenager. And so Jonathan seems to have been seasoned a bit, and probably a little older than David, but even with that, they form a close friendship. So let's start with verse 1 in chapter 18. And it came to pass when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, and this is speaking about David, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. In other words, they were very close. They had a lot in common and become very close. And Saul took him that day and would let him go no more home to his father's house. Again, speaking of David, he would not let David go home. Why? Well, he's got the hero there. You know, he's Saul. Remember, the Lord has left Saul, and the Lord put a evil spirit on Saul. And Saul, it appears, and we'll see this in a little bit, and we get to reading more of this. It appears as though Saul understands that the Lord has left him. You know, not just because the prophet Samuel had told him so, but he knows it now. And so Saul, we begin to see the schizophrenic side of Saul. We begin to see some of that as he begins to fear David, his greatest ally. You know, David's not made any threats to Saul. He's been willing to help. He defended the Lord and the kingdom when he defeated Goliath. He did Saul a favor by doing that. But Saul becomes jealous because David begins to gain favor with the people, and especially with his own son Jonathan, his closest kin. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword and his bow and to his girdle. So this should tell us too, also here, that Jonathan and David were probably similar in size. We know Saul was head and shoulders taller than most of the men of Israel. The Bible tells us that. It doesn't tell us much about the stature of Jonathan. David, we know that he was still small. He was not full grown yet. And remember when he tried to put on Saul's armor before he fought Goliath, it didn't fit. And he didn't feel comfortable wearing it. Not just because it didn't fit, but also because he was not trained in how to use the clothing of warfare. Here, Jonathan gives him his clothing of warfare, his military uniform, if you will, and his weapons, and as a gift of friendship. And so that's how much Jonathan thought of him. He gave him what would have probably been Jonathan's prized possessions, the things that he has worn in battle, and it has protected him, and it has done good service for him. So he gives all these things to David now. And David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. David went out wherever Saul sent him. He didn't backtalk, didn't ask questions. Wherever Saul sent him to fight, he went. And Saul puts him over the army, the men of war. But also notice what it says there. David behaved himself wisely. Not cunningly, not wickedly, not conniving, but wisely. Wisdom of the Lord, I believe, is what he's talking about here. And we'll see this phrase again later in this chapter. As we go through this, the Lord brings this up again about David behaving himself wisely. In other words, David's buying his time. David knows the Lord wants David as king. David knows that. Remember, he was anointed by Samuel. As far as we know, as of right now, Saul doesn't know about that yet. Doesn't know about the anointing of David. He doesn't realize David is his competition for the throne. He does know that God's not happy with him, and that God is planning on bringing someone else in, but he doesn't know who it is yet. But David's buying his time here. He knows the Lord's got plans for him, and so he's going to do what he's got to do. He's going to do a good job for his employer, if you will. He's going to do a good job. He's going to do what's asked of him. And we also see that he's been accepted in the sight of all the people. All the people, that David's a big hero now in Israel. And Saul has promoted him. It appears as though maybe even his top general here now. He's over the men of war. And so the people have accepted him, and also Saul's servants, those of his servants in the palace. They know who David is, and they know how special he is to the king. And it came to pass, as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul with tabrets, with joy, and with instruments of music. Now, if you're a godly nation, is this a way to act? Not really. The women come out and are singing and dancing for the king. Now, we know there was a time, at least once that I can think of, might have been more than once, that David danced before the Lord. They're not dancing before the Lord, are they? They're dancing before King Saul and for his army. The women answered one another as they played and said, Saul hath slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. Now here's where the trouble starts. The women think more of David than they do of Saul. And how does Saul take that? Not very well. And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. And he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? He says, I'm the king. He doesn't have the kingdom. David doesn't have the kingdom. I'm the king. How special can he be if he's not the king? Well, they said David's killed 10,000s. Well, for one, that's not true. As far as we know, we don't know how many David killed exactly up to this point, but we know Saul's been fighting a lot longer than David has. I don't know how long a period this has taken place between the time he killed. Well, you see in verse 6, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine. That's talking about Goliath. So this is just a short period of time. Maybe days, maybe weeks, maybe a month or two at the most, that he's returned back home to after killing Goliath. Now we know in verse 5 he went wherever Saul sent him and fought more. We know that he fought more after killing Goliath. He was there when the army of Israel fought with the Philistines. After that, the army of the Philistines after that. But I kind of doubt that David had killed 10,000s by that time. Maybe, but it doesn't appear that way. Saul, on the other hand, certainly since he's become king, he was a pretty bloody king. He attacked everybody around him, and not just the Philistines, but anybody else that he didn't like. He went and fought them. So certainly, Saul's thinking, how can you put a boy who's just entered the service over the king who's been fighting for some time, for several years now? And jealousy sets in. And Saul eyed David from that day and forward. In other words, he was jealous. He watched him. He began to watch him, and he's waiting to catch him doing something wrong now. And verse 10 says, And it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul. Remember, the evil spirit would leave from time to time. Usually when David would play his music, it would cause the evil spirit to leave. Well, now the evil spirit is back. That the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house. Now, in the midst of the house, and David played with his hand as at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hand. Now, this prophesying is not the same as it's not the same as the prophet Samuel. In other words, he's just telling things. Basically, either telling of what's the plans of the king. The king's telling the plans of the kingdom, what he has for the kingdom, or maybe he's telling David and the others there about what their next battle is going to be, who they're going to fight next. He's telling things that are prophecy, things that are to come, but it's not the same. It's not the prophecy of God. And Saul's got a javelin in his hand. He's loaded. And Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. So he throws the javelin. It doesn't really say if he threw it at David, but he threw it in anger, talking about David. And David knows now that Saul is jealous and that he's got to watch him. He's got to watch his back now around Saul. It says David avoided out of his presence twice. He avoided Saul twice. When Saul, either when Saul called for him or when there was some kind of meeting, he just didn't go because he knew of the tension there. And this is more of his acting wisely. And Saul was afraid of David. Now we find out the truth. Saul's afraid of David. Why? Because the Lord was with him and was departed from Saul. So there we know Saul understands. He has a good understanding that the Lord has left him, but the Lord is with David. Another reason to be jealous, huh? Saul has had a taste of the Lord being with him, and he liked it. But then when he messed up, when he tried to worship contrary to what the Lord had told him, what the Lord had commanded him to worship, how to worship, and contrary, remember the oath that he made for the people, that they weren't to, after fighting a battle all day, they weren't to eat anything. They were to fast for a time. Saul's afraid of David because he knows David's got the Lord, and he knows what the Lord's capable of. He's seen it firsthand. Therefore Saul removed him from him and made him his captain over 1,000, and he went out and came in before the people. So Saul is kind of demoted David. He's made him captain over 1,000, it says, but he's no longer in the presence of Saul. He's no longer in the palace anymore. He's put him to work. And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Again, David is following the wisdom of the Lord, isn't he? He's buying his time here. He's listening to the Lord. He's paying attention to what's going on around him. He's acting accordingly. And part of it is to stay alive because now Saul has got it out for him. The other part is I believe David knows that he's going to be the next king. He just doesn't know when. And so he's trying to soothe things over with Saul when possible, just to stay in his good graces, if you will. Wherefore, when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. Saul's no dummy, is he? He's caught on to what David's doing. He sees David is acting according to the ways of the Lord, and he's afraid of him. He's afraid of David. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he went out and came in before them. So David just is going around doing his thing. Whatever Saul has told him to do, he's doing it. He's going in and out amongst the people. The people love him. He's probably drawing a crowd whenever he comes out. And you don't know what all took place in their day and time. Maybe even being invited to dinners and things of that nature by the people. He's become very popular, more popular than Saul now. And Saul said to David, "Behold, my elder daughter Merab, her will I give thee to wife. Only be thou valiant for me, and fight the Lord's battles." For Saul said, let not thine hand be upon him, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him. So Saul has promised his oldest daughter to David for a wife, and he tells him, all I'm asking is that you go and be a good warrior, fight the Philistines and kill them. But notice he says, let not mine hand be upon him. In other words, I'm not going to protect him. We'll send him out, and maybe the Philistines will kill him. That's his plan. And David said unto Saul, who am I? And what is my life or my father's family in Israel that I should be son-in-law to the king? I'm not royalty. I'm not in the line of royalty here. You know, my father's well known, but we're not royalty in Israel. What have I done to deserve to be the son-in-law to the king? And it's in their day and time, especially if you watched the kingdoms around them, and I'm sure that's the only example they would have at that time, because Saul being their first king, there really was no lineage in Israel as far as royalty, other than Saul's family. But the practice back in those days was, if you married into the king's family, especially his children, you had to be royalty of some sort, either from another kingdom or, David wasn't even high up in the tribe of Judah. You know, and he knew all that. He understood this. He told Saul, why? What have I done? How am I good enough to be the son-in-law to the king? But it came to pass at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given unto Adriel the Meholathite to wife. So he missed out. She was promised to somebody else. Well, next, and Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David. So he had another daughter. She fell in love with David. And what girl wouldn't? You know, here's the hero of the kingdom. Supposedly he's a good-looking man, or a good-looking young man by this time. And they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. So Saul's drawing him in. And Saul said, I will give him her, that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Wherefore Saul said to David, thou shalt this day be my son-in-law in the one of the twain. So Saul is conniving, he's sneaky, he thinks anyway, and he's trying to figure out a way to get rid of David. He brings him in as a son-in-law, marries him off to his younger daughter, and he's hoping that she'll be a distraction to him, so that when he goes to fight his next battle. Now, one thing that's not mentioned here, but if you remember the law, and it's mentioned later in the Old Testament, when you get to more of the story of David later, after he becomes king. But when a soldier, married, they were required to stay home for a year. That was in the law. But there's no mention of that here. Saul's expecting David to go right back out and fight again. He's gonna break the law of God right here. And it's not David, it's Saul. And so he's hoping that this will be so much of a distraction on David that he won't be able to fight, and that the Philistines we'll take him, we'll capture him or kill him, one of the two. And Saul commanded his servants, saying, Commune with David secretly, and say, Behold, the king hath delight in thee, and all his servants love thee. Now therefore be the king's son-in-law. Well, David already knows that Saul's got it out for him because he was there when Saul had the javelin, remember? And he's trying to avoid him. Now, so David is still going to act wisely. You can see that. He's going to be careful because he doesn't trust Saul. But Saul doesn't go to him himself. He sends his servants. And he tells them, you go and tell him that the king likes him, loves him, and his daughter loves him, and I'm going to make him my son-in-law. And for a boy like David, what better thing on this earth could there be than to be married to the king's daughter? And Saul's servants spake those words in the ears of David. And David said, Seemeth it to you a light thing to be a king's son-in-law, seeing that I'm a poor man and lightly esteemed? So David tells the servants, y'all are joking. You don't be making fun of this situation. Don't be taking light of this. This is a serious matter for a poor man to marry into the king's family. I mean, that's unheard of in their day and time. We've seen it the last 40, 50 years, maybe, well, you go back further than that, especially with the royalty over in England. There's been times where a prince or a princess married somebody who was not royalty. They were not of any royal bloodline. And usually that spouse never got to take the title of king or queen when the king or queen, took the throne finally from when their parents passed away or moved on, whatever. But we see those things happen today. It's a very similar situation, but in this case, he's just a shepherd boy. His father had a little bit of wealth, but not a lot. And he's just lightly esteemed. He's a nobody. Except for this killing of Goliath, nobody ever heard of him. And the servants of Saul told him, saying, On this manner spake David. And Saul said, Thus shall ye say to David, The king desireth not any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines, to be avenged of the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. What a request, huh? I mean, we won't get into all the gory details there, but the Philistines are heathens. They don't believe in circumcision like the Jews do. So that's what he's talking about here. He tells his servants to tell David, I'm not expecting a dowry where, normally a man was to marry into the king's family. He would bring sheep or goats or cows or whatever he had to pay a dowry, maybe even gold. If he had money, he would bring money. But he knows David doesn't have those things to give. Remember, David was a shepherd, and he watched over his father's sheep, but they're not his sheep. And remember, in their day also, David is far enough down the line in his brothers, that he's probably not going to get much of an inheritance from his dad when his dad passes away. Remember, the oldest brother, the oldest son, always got the majority, got the largest portion from the father's inheritance. And then it dwindled down the further down the line you went. So the more sons a man had, if you were at the end of the line, you didn't get much, if you got anything. So David, depending on how much his father had, he may not have been getting anything if his father passed away, as far as an inheritance. And so the king knows that. And he tells him, I'm not expecting wealth from you. Go do this to the Philistines. Kill them and bring their foreskins to me. 100 of them. Not just a few, but 100. And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law, and the days were not expired. Wherefore David arose and went, he and his men, and slew of the Philistine 200 men. So he doubled it. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full tale to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him Michal as his daughter to wife. So David's now married to the king's daughter. And what a dowry, huh? I mean, who would have thought of something like that? How wicked would you have to be? And remember, Saul has this evil spirit on him. How wicked would you have to be to think of something like that? To tell a guy to go out and do that to your enemy and bring him to me. What purpose is that? And what kind of bounty from a battle would that be? You know, especially for an army of God and the nation of God. Why? God didn't tell him to, did he? This is just more of Saul's demented mind. But he got what he wanted. He got a son-in-law. He got David as his son-in-law now, and now he can keep closer tabs on him. And Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was set the more afraid of David, and Saul became David's enemy continually. So from now on out, Saul is David's enemy. David, it doesn't matter, even though they're father-in-law and son-in-law, their relationship is very, very much strained. And even though Saul, it says, Saul knew the Lord was with David, and he saw that his daughter loved David. But it also says Saul was yet the more afraid. He's even more afraid of David now. Then the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it came to pass, after they went forth, that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was much set by. So David, again, follows the Lord. He behaves himself wisely, it says, more so than any of Saul's servants. In other words, he's more cautious of Saul than any of Saul's other servants. And by doing so, it says, so that his name was much set by. In other words, others noticed this. Others realized that David was being very cautious of Saul and didn't trust him, and was acting wisely around him. So, we're going to stop there for tonight. We get to chapter 19, we'll see where Saul is more than ever going to try to have David killed. He's already tried it here in chapter 18 when he sent him out to fight the Philistines. Now Saul is going to talk to his own son Jonathan, David's best friend, and try to convince him to kill David. So we'll stop there for tonight.